Well, welcome everybody to this Help to Grow Management Alumni webinar on the theme of agility. And I'm delighted to be joined by George Gregory. But just before George introduces himself, we have a couple of little housekeeping points to mention. The first is that this will be recorded and then it will be posted on the same link that you used to register. So if you want to see that, then take a look. And the second thing is, as we go through, we're really keen to get your questions and make this as relevant to you as we possibly can. There are two things that you'll see. There's the Q&A and what's known as the classic chat. The Q&A is where it would be great if you could put your questions in there so they're in one place, and we'll keep our eye on those. The chat is for expressing feelings or other things that you might want to talk about, but not the questions for us. So we will only be looking at the Q&A as we go through. So let's make a start.
Yeah.
George, who are you, George?
Who am I? Who is George Gregory? Yeah. So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. As Patrick said, my name is George Gregory. I'm a regional director here at SAP Concur. SAP Concur, in short, we offer a full spend management platform. We're most famous for our expense automation software, and I specifically work within the SME sector. So my team, we focus on working with clients, I hope similar to the audience today. So from startups right through to about 300 UK-based employees, offering automation of their spend management platform. I've been in the IT sector now for around a decade, and before that, I was actually working in a completely different industry. I was working in the office furniture sector, advising organisations on really how they could get the best out of their spaces through the built environment. And actually, I moved over. Luckily, I moved before COVID happened. But I quickly came to realize that you could get better results more quickly for less investment in the software sector than you could in those more sort of traditional environments. So yeah, that was the reason.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Well, I guess we've got a lot of software people on the call, so they'll be particularly interested in that. But also, I guess that office furniture sector is one that's had to be very agile. I guess you were agile going before it needed to be really, really agile.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, obviously, the theme of agility as well is something that was really playing in that sector. Just, I mean, moving from this idea of everybody sitting in a cubicle and working away by themselves to these large collaborative spaces. Whilst at the same time, most people were looking to give back real estate at the end of leases. So it was, how we went about creating those agile spaces for people to work in, that didn't just mean, well, we'll have no more meeting rooms, everybody will be in the open plan.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a very interesting time in the sector, and obviously even more so now that we have hybrid working and return to office policies.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, I'm Patrick Dunn. I chair a few things, the Royal Voluntary Service in the UK and Education Sub-Saharan Africa in Africa. But the bulk of my executive career was in the venture growth and private equity space. So very familiar with startups, growing companies and companies doing turnarounds and all the rest of it. So agility has been at the heart of my career since I started. I guess the trigger for this webinar was a LinkedIn article I wrote recently, which was entitled "If We're Not Agile, We're Fragile," because I think there's been dramatic evidence in the last few years that if you don't move, you get left behind. And we thought today what we'd look at is a few things. We don't have a huge amount of time, but we'd focus on, what is agility? Why does it matter? What might be the inhibitors to agility? And what might be the enablers to agility, and we're really focused on the sizes of companies that you're all engaged in. So George, maybe kick off on that. What is agility? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think you cover it nicely in the opening paragraph of your article, where you say, agility is one of those leadership words that can mean a huge amount of things to different people. I think for me, from an IT and software perspective, it's using what's around you to be able to make changes, but do it in a sustainable way that doesn't necessarily affect the core business functionality of your business. And for me, that forms three key areas. So it's the way that you take data-driven decisions, how quickly and easily you're able to get to your data. Secondarily, you can't have a tech conversation nowadays without talking about AI. So what AI is going to mean for that, how you can best leverage that, and we can talk further on later about that. And then finally, automation, reducing those manual tasks to allow yourself to spend more time, or pivot really to spending more time on doing the things that are going to positively affect your business, as opposed to old-fashioned data entry, all those manual tasks that nobody wants to be spending any time on.
Yeah, I think that's right. And to me, I mean, the only thing I'd add to that, I think it was a good summary, is I think it's not just the ability to respond to change. I think there's also something about anticipating change. I think the most agile organizations are slightly ahead of the game, and they're slightly ahead of the game because they've been thinking about it before they need to do it. And in terms of why it matters, I think it matters enormously because agile businesses, whether they're small or large, are magnets for customers. Customers who want the best products that are delivering value in the best way, and that comes through agility, constantly improving what you do. Talent. I think agile organizations are talent magnets. You're more likely to get the best people, particularly in tech, particularly in software, if you're doing innovative things and if you're at the lead. And most of all, I mean, I guess very close to my heart is it's actually a magnet for investment as well. Investors want to back people doing different things, bringing something new to the market that's going to offer value that isn't there currently. So I think there's quite a lot around that.
Yeah,
kind of why it matters. What do you think are the inhibitors to what stops people being?
What stops people being? There's a lot of distraction, I think.
Sorry, can I just say I can't see the Q&A here.
It'll be in just that bottom bit.
Yeah, I can see. Oh, there. Sorry.
I think as it stands,
there aren't any questions.
No questions right now.
Please do put questions in as we go through. We'll catch up. We'll talk for a little bit, and then we'll deal with the questions. Sorry, that was why. Okay. I should say also I'm dyslexic, so that's why I don't always see these.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, the inhibitors. I mean, again, I would push everybody towards the article that's attached. From where you explain it quite nicely. In my area, it's there are a couple of things. So firstly, one of the things that really restricts people and their agility is this idea of, well, we've always done things this way. And I think in the SME sector, dare I say it, especially where you're dealing with legacy owner managed organizations, that appetite for risks can sometimes be a lot less, which I understand. I work a lot in sales, and I've worked through 3 recessions. And in a recession, everyone says, well, with the current economic climate, we really need to be aware of where we're spending our money. I don't think I've ever heard anybody outside of a recession go, well, we don't care where we're putting our cash to. Yeah. So that's the first part, this idea of, well, we've always done it, it's not broke, why fix it? And I would also say sometimes, especially with SMEs, we see almost an over-focusing on agility. So forgetting what your company's core function is for. I can think of a specific example of somebody that one of my colleagues is actually now working at, went to work for a startup where they're looking for investment coming from your sort of area, and every time they speak to a different investor, the business function changes.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a real problem for agility as well. It's you know, you can be it's about being flexible but not bendy, perhaps, I would say.
Interesting. I mean, it fits very well with the first question actually from L Cell. So change and innovation is great, but what do you think of the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, when you were prompting something in my mind, which is, you know, it's always hard when you're relatively small and you have thin resources, especially thin financial resources, to invest in the next thing.
Yeah.
And what you don't want to do is trash the current product and turn that off, because if you've got a winning product, you know, you want to maximize the income, the profit that you can get from that. So I think one of the things that someone told me very early on, and it was reinforced actually by a very good friend of mine who's a brilliant Pilates teacher. So he said, you know, in order to be flexible and to be able to move quickly, you need a very strong core. So one of the things that I've tried to do in the startups where I've either started myself or been involved in is make sure we get as quickly as we can that strong core, that engine of profit, that engine of cash flow, that engine of strengthening the balance sheet. And that then will enable us to then be fleet of foot on other things. So I think that's a great question, El. And that the answer to that question is really down to your acumen and judgment.
Yeah.
You know, it's a really hard thing to sort of mathematically do. Often it's a judgment, particularly in those early stages. So great question. There's another question. We'll answer a couple of questions and then we'll move forward on.
Absolutely.
So George, you want to take the next one? What techniques and mechanisms can be used to identify change so that we can then start to plan? I guess.
I mean, I would. Well, actually, that's and that links nicely to the point that you just made. Actually, so you know, how do we make these decisions? And why do we make these decisions? And as that pertains to data. Now, data is a really interesting area. If I think of an example outside of my working life, I was lucky enough to do a behind the scenes tour of one of the big rugby clubs recently, and they were talking about sort of how they do data on player analysis, that kind of thing. But one of the areas the coach said to me was like, well, I've had a company call me up and offer me 65,000 pieces of data per match, and that's just too much. I don't care about what such and such was doing over there. I need to know what's going on in a 5 meter radius of where the ball is being played. And I would say it's the same for business, right? So the ability to use tools and products to get to the bottom of the iceberg, really, of all that different data is key. And I think, you know, I would advise you guys to look into the reporting suites that are available within your products. I think sometimes as well, as it pertains to agility, learning new skills is extraordinarily important. I've found with a number of people I've worked with, there's almost a reluctance to admit perhaps they don't know how to use the systems and things, and I have to take that on myself. You know, I'm a director here, and I've actually done an Excel for Dummies course in the last 2 years because, you know, my reporting ability was not where it needed to be, and so I've had to sort of push forward and flex with that. So that's the first thing I would say. You know, learn new skills, look down into the data that is available to make those business decisions would be my first starting point. Yeah,
I think that point around being data savvy is really important. I wrote another article about that a while ago, and because I was becoming concerned that a lot of directors were not as data savvy as perhaps they might be. Now, you don't want everyone necessarily to be a rock star mathematician or statistician. That's not what I'm talking about. But the ability to understand what is important data, what are the really key variables, what are the key things, and to be able to spot, you know, trends and understand that, and also understand the difference between, you know, causation and correlation. This is the basic stuff. So I think, you know, having the right data systems in place, having the ability to use those data systems, interrogate those data systems, and if you're on a sort of normal distribution, you know, not be at the data drunk end, like your rugby guy would have been if he'd done that. and not be at the data devoid end, be in somewhere in the middle.
And be happy to be told, to be happy to believe the data.
Yeah,
Right. Sometimes what we do is we allow ourselves to have an idea, have an argument, have a business plan, and then go and find the data that proves that what we're
supports
talking
that.
about is right.
yeah,
And it's been quite humbling for me since COVID. SAP Concur, as I've said, we're the world's leading provider of travel management and expense software. Not much of that was going on in 2020 through 2022. So how we had to show a huge amount of flexibility in pivoting to new products, new services, without forgetting what we're all about.
yeah.
If you don't mind, I can use a specific example.
Yeah.
So traditionally, the clients that we tend to do quite well with tend to be those professional services organisations. Where one of their highest costs is going to be staff cost. But obviously, those people weren't travelling very much, but there were industries that still were doing quite well. And I remember, thankfully they've left the organisation now, so we won't get in trouble. But one of the senior directors came in and basically said, well, people are buying pasta, so let's focus all our energy on going after pasta producing companies, because they're the only people that are buying anything right now. And that to me was a perfect example of a misinterpretation, shall we say, of what is an important vertical for our business. And so we looked at that and we tried, but it proved to be a bit of a dead end for obvious reasons. Like I say, just let the data feed you, as opposed to have an argument and then use the data to back it up.
So the pasta was actually a red herring. I mean, it's interesting. One of the other things that maybe we can do is recommend a few books as we go along the way. So 2 books on that whole data topic that I love. One is Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. It's about how we make decisions and the biases that we are susceptible to. Even if you might be very bright, you can still be susceptible to a lot of these biases. There are about 30 of these biases. That confirmation bias that you were talking about being just one of them. And the other one, if statistics hasn't been your route, if that's not your thing, there's a fantastic book by David Spiegelhalter, a famous statistician, called The Art of Statistics, which is really accessible and actually is a great coaching guide to how to understand data and all the rest of it. Next question we've got here is, how can you get your partners, suppliers or clients also to be agile? That's a brilliant question. Some of them are still stuck in the legacy mindset. So
I was reading that question coming up, thinking how best to answer that. So I can talk through how as it pertains to how we deal with ours, and where we've refocused our efforts in engaging with clients. So you talk about books. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the name of the author right now, but there's a fantastic book called The Outcome Generation. I'm not sure if you
Malcolm Gladwell.
I'm not sure. I can look it up and see later. But basically, there's been especially in the tech sector specifically, but more in the market, there's been a change in the way that we have engaged with our clients. So very briefly, back in the 80s and 90s, we produced products, right? IBM produced products. Microsoft turned up with Windows. We're like, here it is,
Blockbuster.
Use it, off you go, right? And SAP actually built a business empire doing that. And then as we moved through sort of into the early 2000s, coming up to sort of 2015 or so, it was all solution selling. Okay, so what's the problem you're trying to fix? And then we go away, we build it. Where we're focusing now is on the outcomes of businesses. So, okay, where do you want to be 5 years from now? What are you looking to achieve by even engaging with me, with my product, with my service? If you focus on the outcome that someone's looking to achieve, now, yes, you probably provide a solution to that problem. But if you look at the outcome that someone's trying to achieve, that allows you to then allows us to subsequently remind our clients, both existing and new business, why they're even involving themselves in this project, and it allows you a better space to sort of talk about the reasons for change.
Yeah.
as opposed to, I think there are some very old-fashioned ideas in the world of selling. You know, this idea of challenger and things like that. I actually don't think that that's appropriate for most modern businesses.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is actually, you know, if you view your suppliers as partners, so it's interesting, you know, many of the retail companies, you know, were pretty hard to their suppliers, you know, battering them down on cost and you know, wanting them to be incredibly agile, but not really, I guess, paying enough for the product to enable them to be so, because they couldn't invest in the systems and the people and so on. So I think if you view your supplier, it's interesting with ESSA, with Rob Entrepreneurs, with other things I've chaired. You know, I've always tried to get the culture right, and I think one of the big things about agility is actually having the right culture in the organization, and that goes through from the board, from the executive team, from everybody. You know, we need to be open-minded, and to be actively open-minded, not just open-minded, and to see suppliers as people actually who are partners going to make money with us. Because if you just batter them down on cost, they then don't have any money to invest in their own innovation. And actually, you always want your suppliers to be bringing you fresh ideas. You know, a lot of the innovation, particularly manufacturing, comes from suppliers. Comes from people saying, actually, we found a better way to do this, or we can use a different metal here, or we can, you know, this will give us more tensile strength, or whatever it might be. We'll be able to do that. If your supplier, you know, sort of resents you, if we can put it at the extreme end, they're not going to bring the best ideas to you, are they? They're going to bring them to the person who is actually, you know, working with them in a spirit of partnership. So let's move on to a few more of the inhibitors before we come back to the question. So any other inhibitors for you, Phil?
Yeah, well, I mean, you've mentioned it here in your article, and training is extraordinarily important. So on Tuesday of this week, so yeah, a few days ago, I was lucky enough to present to a group of CFOs in London, and we were talking about the importance of leadership engagement in the future. So quite often what we'll find is that leaders will be engaged in something whilst the process is happening, and then they'll just farm it off to somebody else. And on the flip side of that, you know, proper training for the items that you, well, again, I'm thinking about software, but you know, proper training in the processes, how that works, but then also understanding the understanding of change management. So if you give someone proper training, following up on that to say, okay, this is a new process that we've got put in place, so it doesn't just go back to how it was. I remember a specific example in my previous organization, where ironically we brought in an expense management tool. It wasn't Concur, but and a lot of the people just found ways round it to do the same as they used to do, but using this new tool. So actually the inefficiency increased. So that's
you create an opening for that.
It's
interesting. I mean, I've just written a new book called 5 Generations at Work about intergenerational working, and one of the most interesting case studies was LVMH. You know, Louis Vuitton, a sort of Goliath in the luxury brands market. And they had a person a while ago who they have 75 kind of business units. They call them the maison because it's French. But what's interesting is these were very tightly focused, you know, really on their markets. But what they were feeling, and one person in particular who was relatively junior at the time, a sort of middle manager, was that we're not getting the innovation across the group. So we might have a good idea over here, that might be in a country or in a different product line, but they weren't then getting the benefit of that around the group. And the way that she described this, I think, was really brilliant. It was about, you know, we've got verticals. What we need also are diagonals and horizontals to go across the organization. You know, they employ 150,000, so it's a very big thing. But they created this thing called LVMH Dare, which was just a simple platform which people could say, I've got this idea, I'd like to do this. Would anyone like to help me? And they gave permission to people to go, to help that person. And if there was someone who had a skill that they thought was missing to enable that thing to happen, because it's one thing having the idea, it's another thing making it happen.
Yeah.
They could go to that person and get some coaching or some training or second them to go do that. Now, this thing has been phenomenally successful. I think they've had 50 odd new businesses and big major products as a result. So, and it's cost them not a lot.
Yeah.
Often these things don't cost money.
Well, it
It's a
allows you.
mindset.
Yeah, it allows you to keep the IP in house, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's a different area, but something that I always think is hilariously funny. Is this idea of Steve Wozniak? He was working for IBM at the time, and so he was doing his day job, and then he was literally sitting in the office building Mac, whilst he was in the office of there. And if he'd have only have had that of somebody going, "What are you doing, Steve?"
Yeah.
Apple's not a thing. That IBM has that IP, and it protects business as well, right? Giving that flexibility.
Yeah, really good. Let's look at some more of the questions. So, Lean Six Sigma versus Agile, relationship and differences. So, Mikhail, that's a sort of a slightly enigmatic question, I think. Any views on that?
Yeah, I'm afraid I'm not sure enough about what the question is to provide a full answer. I'm afraid I'm not sure what Lean Six Sigma is.
Well, Six Sigma is a process to basically maximize your return on investment from the assets that you have, whether they're human or whether they're physical. Sybil Dibbler would like to answer this question live. Oh, Sybil, do you want to answer it? Oh, you're going to put it in. You're going to type. She's going to type the answer in the box. Okay, all right. What AI tools would you recommend being invaluable to businesses in helping to reduce the manual tasks?
Yeah, no, I had read that question. I thought I know that one's going to come to me. So, I mean, again, it's a huge question, right? I mean, AI in and of itself is a huge area. What I can suggest people do this. We've done a really we actually have, and it's in the description here, a recent article. We called it CFO Insights Repositioning for Growth, and also how to measure and maximize AI returns. So with that, we've worked globally with a number of CFOs, our clients and not clients from different market sectors and also company sizes. And one of the things that I found really interesting was in the area of AI, specifically in the UK, specifically for SMEs. And the first thing to say is 90%, that's 90% of CFOs, CEOs, and MDs believe that they don't know enough about AI. So my first area would be to say, right, okay, we'll buy this tool, and this tool is to actually identify the problem that you're looking to solve with it. Because AI, I think it's got mixed up into the Silicon Valley tech bros of this world who are talking about these huge, massive changes it's going to make. And you think of Amazon and X and all these people. But actually, it's about the incremental changes it's going to make to you on a day-to-day basis. So I can talk to it from a Concur perspective. We have AI in our tool. So when you take a photograph of a receipt, if it's from Starbucks at 8:30 in the morning, the AI says it's breakfast.
Yeah.
So what I would encourage you to do is when you're engaging with these AI processes, is to actually think, okay, well, what are the little bits I'm trying to solve? What are the little annoyances on a daily basis that I wish something could do for me? And I'm pretty sure you'll find that there is an AI tool being developed to look for that. On the flip side, in the bigger areas, involve yourself with a GPT function, I would suggest. So if you are, somebody gave me a really good tip. So we now, before we go into any of our new client meetings, we will actually, if the company that we're trying to deal with is a publicly traded organization, I'll feed the three most recent earning calls, because there's always a transcript.
Yeah,
Feed that into GPT and find out what their investors are angry about, and see what we can do to answer those questions.
I think that's a brilliant point. I mean, if you separate it down into using AI to be better informed to take decisions, using AI to take decisions, and using AI to do stuff. There are a plethora of products, and actually you can use AI to find out which products
Yes,
ironically, which I have done numerous times. So for example, in terms of if you're on a board, you need board minutes. Actually at ESSA, obviously we use an AI tool which is fundamentally a transcribing type tool, but if it links to the board papers, it can tell what the resolutions are, it can tell what the recommendations are, and it can produce a draft set of minutes for you 10 minutes after the meeting, which still needs human intervention to finalize, but you're there. I mean, many people are using ChatGPT that way to also write stuff.
Can I make a point around ChatGPT and something that we're moving away necessarily from agility, but I think it's important in the area of we're trying to work more effectively, and be agile in the tools that we're using. I would just, it may sound simple to say to everybody, but if you're using ChatGPT, that's an open source software. And I personally am quite concerned of the number of businesses that are using it as though it's a private cloud. To the stage whereby if you're planning on putting like proposal information into ChatGPT, that's a bad idea. So that's just my warning piece here.
Absolutely.
Get your own
data
tools for this.
protection.
Get your own tools for this.
Absolutely. Now, there's a fantastic question here which helps me as well, because I want to move on to the enablers. So, James, you've said, what can you do about staff who dislike change and resist attempts to alter the way they work? Well, that might not sound like an enabling question, but one of the things I feel is a very important enabler for organizations to be agile is actually having people who can manage conflict, deal with conflict, resolve conflict well. And that's a fundamental conflict where you've got somebody who's very comfortable doing something, and maybe their personality is that they don't resist change. They're not a bad person, that's just their personal preferences. You have other people who just love change and they want to change everything all the time, and you never make any money with them either. So when you look at managing conflict, fundamentally, there's 5 things you can do in a conflict situation. You can compete, you can collaborate, you can compromise, you can avoid, or you can accommodate. And people who are very good at managing conflict take the time to think about which of those is the right response with that person, with that issue, on that day, with that mood in the room, and so on. They're very good at that. Now, interestingly, CEOs, and I know there are a fair number of founder CEOs on the call. If you test, there's a very well-known test which you can do online. It's called the Thomas Kilmann test. If you test yourself as to what your instinctive preferences are to conflict, what you find is CEOs tend to be high in compete and high in avoid. So die in a ditch over things I care about, disengage from stuff I think is low level. They may throw a veil of collaboration over a meeting, like, hi everyone, I'd love to know what you think. But as long as you think the same as me, then that's going to be okay. If you don't, I flick on my compete or my avoid switch. So and you can train people how to manage conflict. We did this at 3i. I was there. I helped build a social enterprise, Leap Confronting Conflict, which helps young people manage conflict more effectively. And the training we had there, you can actually train people how to manage conflict. In most of the startups where I've done directly, so ESSA would be a good example, we basically trained the team how to manage conflict, and because we thought that would enhance their performance, make them get things done more quickly, which you could say is a contribution to agility. So I think do the test on managing conflict, the Thomas Gilman test, and read some of the stuff I and others have written about managing conflict. It's a simple one from Vanessa. Can you get the article if you're not on LinkedIn? Not really, but I'm sure if you sent your email address to Sybil, I can get Sybil a PDF of it, and we can get that to you. So any other enablers, George?
Yeah, I'm referring to we've talked about culture, we've talked about we've talked about that repetitive, that idea of repetition. Sometimes I say to my team, guys, this is doing push-ups, right? This is you've got to do these exercises. And finally, leadership buy-in, of course, is the key. I'm assuming people on the call are gonna recognize if you allow yourself an idea to say, well, that's for them and this is for me, as an MD of an organization, it's not going to work out the way you want. So you have to have that level of leadership buy-in. We're very lucky at SAP that we run the way that we run what we preach, for the most part. And I think that's extraordinarily important as well.
Yeah, I think diversity is probably an important thing as well. So I'm a huge fan of next generation boards, even in very small organizations. I mean, they can be really powerful having that group of, they're often younger people, but they can be multi-generational as well, where you, and in fact, Gucci's is sort of one of the poster childs of this, but there are the much smaller organizations as well, because they challenge your thinking, they bring fresh ideas, and they bring legitimacy to your market.
Yeah.
If it's true, it's genuine, that actually this product idea came from a group of young people like you, our customers, it's probably going to do better. What tips can you share on boarding the right recruits with an agility mindset? In addition, any tips on continually fostering this agile mindset in the organization? I think curiosity is probably a big thing for me, because I think often agility comes out of someone thinking about something, someone seeing a problem, and someone, the one of the best business ideas, in the last century and a half was the traffic light. That's so sustainable. So far, maybe with AI it may not be needed anymore with auto driving, but that idea, there's a guy in his 50s, I think, who came up with that idea. Fantastic idea, because he worried about people getting hurt as the first automobiles were crossing junctions. So I think there is something about the curiosity that feeds that. So I look for that when I'm recruiting people. I don't know what sort of other things you look for.
Yeah, I mean, so there's who we're recruiting. I think I might come to give my experience on when you've found the right person. How do you onboard them and get them into the company culture in a way that means that they don't lose everything that was the reason that you brought them on in the first place?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
So one of the first things I think is really important as you onboard staff is that you ensure that you've carved out the time to do it correctly. It's such a pressured environment to, you've spent money on someone, you need to get them in, you need to get the ROI for your staff member. And I think where I've seen it done successfully in organizations is actually where the onboarding is actually their first part of their job. It doesn't have to be ridiculous. But the second part of that is where I've not seen it work successfully, is that people, where you onboard someone so quickly that they don't get an idea of your company culture, or of this agile mindset, and then you put them into a position whereby they're ill-equipped to do their job properly, which leads to people going into themselves and not being in a position where they want to express what's going on in here, which they can bring to your organization.
Brilliant. Well, thanks, George. We probably should sum up, and then I've got a couple of bits of
Yeah.
housekeeping at the end. So to sum up, I think our message would be agility is more of an imperative than an option.
Yeah.
And I think it's something you need to build in from the start of the organization. We've emphasized the culture, we've emphasized the data and being data savvy. I think that enhancing core strength is probably the key thing for me. And whenever I've started something up or helped someone with a startup, it's about how can you build in, those muscles that you'll then be able to use later to leap across the corporate world and do your thing. So great questions, everyone. Thank you. I'm so sorry we haven't been able to answer all of them. There will be a feedback form in the chat, I think, which Sybil and colleagues will put in. And they've asked us also to make you aware of a forthcoming webinar. And that webinar is something that I know is a real subject close to most early stage growth companies, which is around late payments. And that's on the 27th of November. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation so far. We might have time for one more, maybe. So what's data standards?
I mean, I can answer that question. There's
Yeah,
what would you do instead of ChatGPT?
Yeah.
Which is a big question with a very quick answer. Right, there isn't one at the minute, right? You've got a lot of companies that are looking, everything with ChatGPT is open source right now. So I guess my advice in that area to you, Stephen, would be, use the tool absolutely for everything that we've described, getting down to data and things like that. Just be very careful of putting your own confidential data into a chat GPT type tool. Absolutely use it. You can type in create me a proposal for XYZ, but just don't put your numbers in there, would be what I would be saying. Use the tool, but just be careful how you use it.
Yeah, but we're in that very exciting early stage. I mean, remember some of us, probably not everyone, remember the early stage of the internet, how exciting it was, but also how all over the place it was. And I think the same is true. The other thing I would be aware of is, there are lots of things that say they're AI, but they're not actually AI. They're just data management, or they're something else. So be really careful what you're buying, and do what you do with other things. Check it out. But thank you all so much for joining, and have a great weekend. Thank you.